Imagine this. A rainy night, a man of wealth and power stands alone in a glittering city when his phone rings. On the other end, a frail little voice whispers, "Daddy, can you come get me? My stomach hurts." A call from a child he's never met yet somehow feels bound to. What secrets lie behind that trembling voice? What journey of love loss and second chances awaits at the end of that midnight road? Where are you watching from today? Drop a comment below, share this moment with us, and may your day be filled with light, kindness, and hope. The rain was coming down hard on Chicago that night, turning the glass towers into blurred pillars of light. Inside the Whitman Foundation's Gala Hall, crystal chandeliers glimmered over tuxedos and evening gowns, champagne bubbling in delicate flutes, as a jazz band played something smooth enough to make people forget how tired they were of smiling. Cole Whitman stood at the edge of it all, his tailored navy suit perfect, his tie knotted with practiced precision, but his mind was elsewhere. Wealth and success had built him a fortress of glass and steel, yet tonight it felt like a cage. He had just slipped outside under the awning where the rain drummed a relentless beat on the city streets when his phone buzzed. Unknown number. For a split second he considered ignoring it. Late-night calls rarely brought good news, but something a whisper in his gut made him swipe to answer. "Hello." His voice was calm, the voice of a man who signed billion-dollar deals without breaking a sweat. On the other end came a sound so fragile it barely cut through the static. A child's breath, then a small, trembling voice, "Daddy, can you come get me? My stomach hurts." The words hit him like a blow to the chest. Cole froze, rain misting his face as if the world itself had stopped to listen. His mind stuttered. He had no children. He had no one who called him that name. Yet this voice carried a weight that couldn't be faked, the desperate belief of a child reaching for the last hand she thought might not let go. Who is this?" he asked, his own voice suddenly hoarse. "Nora," the girl whispered, the syllables cracked and dry like autumn leaves underfoot. There was silence on the line, then almost as an afterthought, Mommy said, "If it hurts too much, call the last number she saved." Cole felt the city noise vanish around him. That name, Nora, was unfamiliar, but beneath it another ghost stirred Madeline Rivers, a name he had buried under years of ambition and regret. The woman he once loved more than anything, the one he left behind in Willow Creek when he chose power over a life they might have built together. He had heard she'd passed away years ago, but he'd never returned, too afraid of the truth, too proud to face his failures. And now, in the middle of this storm, a little girl's voice called him Daddy. Where are you, Nora?" His question came out urgent, stripped of the measured control he was known for. There was a faint sniffle. "Ash Hollow Lane, number 27. The bathroom's cold." A soft click followed as the line went dead. Cole stood motionless, phone pressed to his ear long after the connection ended. A dozen rational thoughts told him this might be a mistake, a scam, a wrong number. But one thing drowned them all: the memory of Madeline's tearful eyes the night he walked away, and the gut-deep certainty that this wasn't random. If Madeline's daughter had no one else to call, then the least he could do, the only decent thing left, was to show up. He didn't return inside to say his goodbyes. He didn't even change out of his suit. He simply handed his valet ticket to the attendant and drove, tires hissing on the rain-slicked streets, leaving Chicago's glittering skyline fading in the rearview mirror. The highway stretched into the night, flanked by fields, drowned in fog and broken streetlights flickering like tired stars. Cole's hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than they ever had during any boardroom negotiation. Every mile westward toward Willow Creek stripped another layer of his armor. He tried to piece together timelines to deny what his heart already screamed, but all he could hear was that frail voice saying, "Daddy, please." By the time he reached the outskirts of Willow Creek, dawn had barely touched the horizon. The town looked smaller than he remembered, its charm worn thin by years of neglect. The once bright storefronts now sagged under peeling paint, the maple trees shedding their last fiery leaves onto cracked sidewalks. And there, at the far end of Ash Hollow Lane, stood the house, a crooked, tired thing with boarded windows and a roof patched with tarps. The front door was ajar, swaying gently in the wind. Cole hesitated only a heartbeat before pushing it open. The stench of damp wood, spoiled food, and something sour clawed at his senses. He stepped into a living room stripped of warmth, a sagging couch stained with time, a muted TV flickering static and silence so heavy it felt like a living thing. Then came the faintest sound, a soft drip of water from somewhere deeper in the house. He followed it down a narrow hallway, his polished shoes creaking on warped floorboards, until he reached a door barely hanging on its hinges. He pushed it open. The bathroom was dim lit only by a small cracked window where the first pale light of dawn struggled through. Mold spread like bruises across yellowed tiles, and beneath the sink, curled into a fragile knot, sat a little girl. Her knees were pulled to her chest, bare feet pressed against the icy floor. Hair tangled and unwashed fell over a face too pale for childhood. One tiny hand clutched an old rotary phone, its cord severed as if the world had cut her line of hope long ago. She looked up when he entered. Her eyes gray like a storm about to break met his. There was no fear in them, no surprise, only a quiet, almost unbearable recognition, like she had known all along that someone would finally come. "Daddy!" Her voice was no louder than a breath. "It hurts so much." Cole felt something in his chest, a splinter, something he thought had turned to stone years ago. He knelt, his expensive trousers soaking up the bathroom's chill, and reached out a hesitant hand. She didn't flinch, didn't lean closer either, just watched him with those hollow eyes, waiting to see if he would vanish like everyone else. "Your name's Nora, right?" he asked softly, his throat tight. She nodded once, a movement so small it was almost invisible. "Okay, sweetheart," he whispered, his voice breaking for the first time in over a decade. "I'm here now. I'm not going anywhere." She let out a shaky breath, one frail hand clinging to the cuff of his sleeve as if testing the promise. He gathered her up, shocked by how light she felt, like carrying a bundle of dry leaves that might scatter if he wasn't careful. As he stepped out of that broken house, he made a silent vow under the pale morning sky, a vow to never let her feel that kind of loneliness again, no matter what it cost him. And though he didn't know it yet, that vow would change both their lives forever. The small-town hospital at Willow Creek wasn't much more than a square of pale brick standing against the cold morning mist. Its neon emergency sign buzzed faintly, as if even electricity here carried weariness in its wires. Cole slammed his car door shut, heart hammering as he gathered Nora in his arms, her head lolling weakly against his shoulder. She hadn't said another word since they left the decaying house on Ash Hollow Lane, only clutching his sleeve as though afraid he'd dissolve if she let go. The automatic doors parted with a slow hiss, letting in a gust of sterile air that smelled faintly of bleach and faintly of despair. A nurse at the front desk glanced up startled and hurried around to meet him. "She's burning up!" Cole rasped, his usually smooth voice stripped to raw edges. "Stomach pain. She's barely conscious." Within seconds, Nora was whisked onto a gurney, monitors beeping as the ER staff worked with quiet, focused urgency. Cole followed helplessly until a nurse held out a hand, blocking him at the doorway to the treatment room. "Sir, we need space to stabilize her." He stepped back, fingers twitching with the sudden ache of uselessness, and leaned against the cold white wall. For years, he had commanded boardrooms, decided the fate of companies with a few well-chosen words. But here, watching a frail little girl fight for breath, he had no power at all, only guilt. Hours later, a soft-spoken doctor approached. Dr. Lena Huang Petit, but with eyes that burned with quiet indignation, held a clipboard thick with notes. "Malnutrition," she said plainly, though her voice carried an undertone of restrained anger. "Severe. She has gastric bloating, signs of mucosal damage from repeated use of adult medication, antacids, laxatives, anything that could dull pain or hide swelling." She looked up sharply. "She's been dosing herself for months, maybe longer." Where were her guardians? Cole swallowed hard, his throat dry as paper. "Her grandmother," he muttered, though the word felt like a lie. A grandmother who wasn't truly there, who lived in another decade, entirely leaving Nora to raise herself in a world too big and too cruel. Dr. Huang's lips pressed into a thin line. "We'll stabilize her, but she needs long-term care. And—" She hesitated, voice softening. "She needs someone to fight for her. Children don't end up like this unless every adult in their life failed them first." Cole's gaze drifted to the glass window where he could see Nora lying on a narrow bed, tiny hands clutching the blanket as though holding onto the last thread tying her to this world. The thought that he had been one of those missing adults carved something deep and jagged into his chest. Elsewhere in Willow Creek that same morning, Sarah Bell, a young police officer with auburn hair pulled into a messy bun under her cap, was driving her patrol car through the drizzle. She'd spent the night helping a homeless mother and her son find a shelter after they'd been sleeping under a bridge. Now a new call came in over the radio. "Elderly female wandering on Route 6, confused, possibly disoriented. Approach with caution." Sarah pulled over to the roadside within minutes, finding a thin woman in a frayed cardigan, hair silver and tangled, muttering to herself as she clutched a plastic grocery bag. "Ma'am, are you all right?" Sarah asked gently, stepping out into the mist. The woman blinked confused and then whispered, "Madeline said she'd be back. I boiled eggs this morning for the girl." Sarah's heart twisted. She recognized her Beatrice Rivers Nora's grandmother. The woman's hands trembled violently, her eyes glassy with a fog that had nothing to do with the weather. Later, Sarah drove Beatrice home to the decrepit house on Ash Hollow Lane, finding the door ajar, the hallway empty. A cold dread settled over her. Something was wrong here, something that had been wrong for far too long. Back at the hospital, the waiting room clock ticked slowly, each second a tiny hammer on Cole's nerves. When at last they allowed him into Nora's room, he moved cautiously, afraid his presence might shatter her fragile peace. She was awake barely, her gray eyes open but dulled with exhaustion. "Hey, sweetheart," he said softly, pulling a chair closer. "You're safe now." Nora looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then, with a voice barely louder than the heart monitor's beep, she whispered, "Mom said, if it hurts too much, call the last number she saved. That was you." Cole swallowed hard, blinking against the burn in his eyes. "I'm sorry I wasn't there sooner." She gave the smallest shrug, like a bird folding its wings. "I thought maybe, if I was good, you'd come." He reached for her hand, hesitated, then gently wrapped his larger one around it. To his relief, she didn't pull away. Instead, she closed her eyes, and for the first time since their paths had crossed, her breathing slowed as though just his presence could ease a little of the pain. Later that afternoon, Sarah arrived at the hospital after filing her report. She found Cole in the hallway, leaning against the wall like a man who had been hollowed out. "I'm Officer Bell," she introduced herself quietly. "I think I found Nora's grandmother this morning. She's not well. Early dementia, I'd guess. There's no one else in that house." Cole nodded slowly, not trusting his voice. Sarah glanced through the glass at the sleeping girl. "You her father?" I think so," he admitted, voice low and raw. "I left Madeline years ago. Never knew." His words broke off, leaving only silence heavy between them. Sarah studied him for a long moment, her gaze neither accusing nor forgiving, simply firm. "Whatever you were before, she needs you now. Don't make her wait again." Cole looked back into the room where Nora lay small and fragile under two white sheets. Something inside him shifted, a steel resolve replacing the hollow guilt. For the first time in years, he wasn't a millionaire, wasn't a man building empires out of ambition. He was just someone who had been given a second chance to be human, and he wasn't going to waste it. That night, long after visiting hours had ended, Cole remained by Nora's bedside. The storm outside had faded to a soft drizzle, tapping against the window. He sat in silence, watching the slight rise and fall of her chest, his own heart beating in unfamiliar rhythm. Somewhere down the hallway, he heard Sarah's voice speaking to a social worker, discussing temporary guardianship and emergency protective custody. Words like process and case number floated through the air, clinical and cold. Cole's jaw tightened. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but one thing was already clear. No more abandoned calls, no more empty promises. Nora's lonely wait was over. The sun rose over Willow Creek, reluctantly washing the small town in a pale gray light that barely reached the hospital's narrow windows. Cole hadn't slept a minute. He sat slumped in the visitor's chair beside Nora's bed, his jacket draped over his knees, his eyes fixed on the child curled beneath thin blankets. Her face, too delicate and far too gaunt for her age, looked peaceful only because exhaustion had stolen the last of her defenses. He reached for a bottle of water on the bedside table, his hand brushing against a small tattered notebook that had slipped from Nora's backpack during the night. Its purple cover was frayed, the spine barely holding together. A name scrawled in hurried handwriting cut through the worn fabric, Madeline R. Cole hesitated, then opened it, pages yellowed from age and dampness. The first entries were careful, almost neat, dated 13 years ago. Week 5. My baby is strong. I don't know how to tell him yet, but someday he'll know. I can do this even alone. As he flipped through the pages, the handwriting grew shakier, hurried like each word was written while trying to outrun despair. Week 21. I want her to feel loved even if it's just me. He left, but I'll stay. By the last entry, blotched with faint water stains, perhaps tears, the words were uneven, desperate. If there's something wrong with my daughter, they'll blame me for not living a good life. But all I ever wanted was to keep her alive. Cole's hands trembled, the pages blurring before his eyes. Each line was a knife slicing through years of self-preservation he had built after leaving Madeline. He had walked away telling himself it was for the best, that she'd be better off without him. But the truth stared back at him from this notebook. His choice had left Madeline to bear everything alone and their child to grow up in silence and pain. A knock on the door startled him. Sarah Bell leaned against the frame, a paper cup of coffee in one hand, her other resting casually on her belt. Her face was tired but kind. "You look like you've been through a war," she said softly, handing him the coffee. "Drink. It won't fix anything, but it'll keep you upright. Cole took it gratefully, muttering thanks. I just got back from the Rivers house. Sarah continued, her tone shifting to something more professional but still laced with quiet outrage. Social services went through the place. Mold-expired food bottles of antacids and laxatives everywhere. Looks like Nora's been medicating herself for over a year. Cole's jaw tightened, his fingers gripping the coffee cup hard enough that it crinkled. And her grandmother, Sarah shook her head. Beatrice is being evaluated. Early dementia confused most of the time. Keeps calling Nora by her daughter's name. In her mind, Madeline never died. She's living 20 years ago. There was a pause, heavy enough to press on their chests. Finally, Sarah lowered her voice. I don't say this lightly, but Nora's case isn't unique. Kids like her, they fall through cracks so wide you could drive a truck through them. No one steps up and they learn to survive alone. Sometimes they don't survive at all. Cole's eyes flicked to Nora's frail frame on the bed. The words scraped raw against his heart. Not this one, he whispered a promise more to himself than to Sarah. Not anymore. Later that morning, Dr. Huang entered with a clipboard and a frown that meant she had little good news. She's stabilizing, the doctor reported, glancing toward Nora. But the damage to her digestive system is serious. Months of malnutrition, stress, and adult medications have taken a toll. She'll need a strict diet, medical supervision, and therapy to undo years of neglect. Cole nodded slowly, his throat tightening. I'll do whatever it takes. The doctor's gaze softened slightly. Then prepare for a fight. The system isn't quick to grant guardianship to a man who walked away 12 years ago. But she needs someone consistent now. If you're staying, make sure you mean it. The words stung, but Cole accepted them like a penance he deserved. That afternoon, Sarah returned with a social worker named Grace Lynn, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a stack of folders under one arm. They sat in the hospital cafeteria, papers spread across the table between them. Grace opened a thin file with Nora's name typed at the top. Here's what we know. Madeline passed away when Nora was 7. Beatrice became her legal guardian but had already shown signs of memory decline. No other family stepped forward. Since then, Nora's had no medical visits except occasional emergency room trips, no consistent school attendance, and no reported contact with a father figure until last night. She looked up sharply at Cole. That's you. He nodded, voice rough. I didn't know. I swear to you, I didn't know about her. Grace regarded him for a moment as if weighing the sincerity of his words. DNA testing will confirm parentage. If it's positive, you'll have a chance at temporary guardianship. But this won't be a smooth road. The court doesn't hand over custody lightly, even to biological parents who've been absent. Cole thought of the little hand clutching his sleeve in that cold bathroom, the notebook filled with Madeline's lonely devotion, the call that saved a child's life because she believed against all odds he might be different. Then I'll fight, he said, steady and low. I won't let her down again. Sarah leaned forward, her voice firm. Good, because she's not just another case. That girl's been carrying an adult's pain in a child's body. What she needs now is someone who won't disappear when things get hard. That night, Cole returned to Nora's room after a brief meeting with his attorney in Chicago. His tie loosened, his hair damp from a sudden downpour. Nora was awake this time, sitting up slightly, coloring on a scrap of paper Dr. Huang had left for her. The picture was crooked lines of a house under rain, a stick figure holding an umbrella, another smaller figure running toward them. Cole sat beside the bed, his voice gentle. That's pretty. Who's that with the umbrella? Nora's pencil paused. She didn't look up as she murmured, the one who came. Something deep in Cole's chest tightened until it ached. He reached out carefully, brushing a strand of hair from her face. I'm not leaving, Nora. I promise you that. For a moment, her hand stilled over the paper. Then she gave a small, tentative nod. Not trust, not yet, but the faintest flicker of hope that maybe this time someone meant the words they said. Outside the window, Willow Creek's night air hung heavy, full of the silence of a town that had looked away for too long. But inside that room, for the first time in 12 years, a father and daughter began to find each other in the fragile space between broken past and uncertain future. The first true morning light in days streamed through the hospital blinds, soft and hesitant, as if uncertain whether it belonged in Nora's world. She sat propped up in bed, a new sweater hanging awkwardly on her thin frame donated by a nurse who had children of her own. She said nothing, just traced circles on a scrap of paper with a blunt crayon, occasionally glancing at Cole as if to make sure he hadn't disappeared. Cole had spent most of the night on his phone and laptop, reaching out to Maplewood Elementary, the public school Nora had once attended. Their responses had been cautious, polite, and full of red tape. Enrollment requires a legal guardian of record. A background review will need to be conducted. A board decision may be necessary given the child's unique circumstances. The words made his teeth clench. Unique circumstances. As though a little girl who just wanted to sit at a desk and learn was an anomaly, not a child who deserved the same dignity as anyone else. By mid-morning, Cole stood in the small conference room of the school district building. A long oval table separated him from a panel of administrators. Principal Callahan, a stocky man with thinning hair and a forced smile. A school psychologist whose eyes flicked nervously between papers. Two parents representing the PTA. And at the far end, Mayor Harriet Lovell, polished in her tailored suit, exuding quiet authority. Nora sat beside Cole, small and silent, her new backpack still with its price tag dangling, resting on her lap. Sarah Bell had come, two arms crossed, her presence steady like an anchor at Cole's side. Principal Callahan cleared his throat. Mr. Whitman, we appreciate your concern for Nora's education. However, the school board must consider the broader classroom environment. There have been reports of past absences, unusual behavior, health concerns. We need to ensure stability for all students. Cole leaned forward, his hands clasped, but his voice steady. Stability. Do you know where she's been living? In a bathroom under a sink, taking adult medication to hide pain because no one came when she called for help. And now you're saying you're not sure she's stable enough to sit next to your children? The words fell heavy, drawing a silence that no one dared to fill. Nora's small hand tightened on his sleeve under the table as if clinging to the only anchor she had left. One of the parents, a man with a bright red tie, finally spoke. It's not that we don't sympathize, Mr. Whitman, but other children might they might not know how to react. It could be disruptive. Cole felt something cold and sharp rise in his chest, a fury he had spent years suppressing in polished boardrooms. He didn't raise his voice, but every word was a hammer. What's more disruptive, a child surviving neglect or an entire community turning its back on her? She's not asking for pity. She's asking for a seat, a chance to be a child again. Sarah leaned forward, her eyes steady on the panel. I've seen kids like Nora on the streets in shelters hiding under overpasses. Most never get the chance to come back. You want to talk about safety. Letting a kid live in silence while we look away isn't safe. It's neglect ours as adults, as a community. The room went quiet unease creeping over the faces around the table. Harriet Lovell finally cleared her throat. We'll need to review guardianship documents before we can approve enrollment. Cole slid a thick folder across the table, temporary guardianship application, hospital reports, a note from Grace Lynn. On top, a folded piece of paper that Nora had clutched all morning. She hesitated, then placed it in front of the principal with trembling fingers. It was a drawing of a school stick figures holding hands, and above it, in crooked letters, I just want a place to sit. Something shifted in the room. For a moment, every adult there seemed to remember what it felt like to be small and scared, just wanting a safe corner in the world. Harriet's stern expression softened ever so slightly. We'll reconvene by tomorrow, she said finally. Nora may start on a trial basis pending final approval. Cole nodded, gratitude and anger mixing like oil and water inside him. It wasn't victory, not yet, but it was a step, and every step mattered. While Cole and Nora faced bureaucracy, Sarah was on another kind of mission. That afternoon she met with Grace Lynn at the Rivers house on Ash Hollow Lane, now taped off for health code violations. The air inside was damp and heavy, as if the house itself had been holding its breath for years. Grace opened a cabinet in the kitchen, pulling out plastic bags filled with empty pill bottles, some smeared with small fingerprints. This is what she was taking, Grace said, her voice low, almost shaking. No prescriptions, just whatever her grandmother had left around. Sarah's jaw tightened, and nobody noticed. No teachers, no neighbors, no child welfare checks. Grace sighed, weariness lining her face. We had a note about a family in crisis years ago. Then the trail went cold. Schools marked Nora as homeschooled. Calls went unanswered. When Madeline passed, Beatrice told everyone Nora was fine. And people wanted to believe it because it was easier than digging deeper. Sarah walked down the hall past the cracked bathroom door, stopping to look at the small space under the sink where Cole had found Nora. A thin blanket still lay there, damp and stained, a silent testament to nights no child should endure. She took a photo, a weight settling in her chest, heavier than her badge. This doesn't end with Nora, she murmured. This whole town needs to start looking harder. Grace nodded. Maybe this time someone finally will. That evening, back at the hospital, Nora sat on the bed cutting colored paper shapes with safety scissors Sarah had brought. Cole was on the phone with his lawyer, pushing through the first steps of formalizing custody. His voice was sharp, determined, not the voice of a man who had walked away once, but of one who had sworn never again. When he hung up, Nora handed him a paper star, edges jagged but earnest. "For you," she whispered. "So you don't leave. Stars don't leave." Cole swallowed hard, crouching to meet her eyes. "Sweetheart, you don't need a star for that. I'm staying because I choose to. Always." For the first time, a flicker of a smile ghosted across Nora's lips, fragile but real. It was small, barely there, but it was a beginning. The courthouse in Willow Creek wasn't much more than a red brick building weathered by decades of small-town trials and forgotten disputes. But to Cole, as he stood on its steps in a simple gray suit, it felt heavier than the steel towers of Chicago. This wasn't a corporate negotiation. This wasn't about wealth or reputation. This was about a little girl sitting in a hospital bed waiting for someone who wouldn't leave. Inside the courtroom was stark and cold, the wood-paneled walls bearing witness to countless silent battles. Judge Marion Hale, a woman in her early 60s with silver hair pinned neatly, presided from the bench. Her sharp eyes scanned the room, seeing everything, weighing everything. Nora sat in the front row beside Grace Lynn, swinging her feet nervously, her small hands clutching the paper star she had made for Cole. Sarah stood discreetly behind them, arms crossed, the quiet presence of someone ready to step in if the world turned cruel again. The state-appointed attorney for child welfare began voice clinical and detached, "Your Honor, while Mr. Whitman has provided evidence of biological relation through DNA, the court must consider his 12-year absence from the child's life, his capacity to care for her, and whether it is in Nora Rivers' best interest to remain under his guardianship." Cole rose slowly, buttoning his jacket with deliberate calm. But when he spoke, there was nothing polished or rehearsed in his voice, only truth raw and unvarnished. "I failed, Madeline." He admitted, his gaze steady on Judge Hale. "Years ago, I walked away when I should have stayed. I didn't know about Nora, but ignorance doesn't absolve me. She needed me, and I wasn't there. I can't undo that past. But today I can choose differently. I'm not here out of guilt or convenience. I'm here because a 12-year-old girl called me in the middle of the night as her last hope, and I will not be the man who lets her down again." The attorney pressed on, intentions aside. "Mr. Whitman, you have no history of guardianship, no long-term residence in Willow Creek. Stability is not built on words." Cole placed a folder on the table, his hands firm. Inside were medical reports documenting Nora's malnutrition, photos of the bathroom she had called home, and a letter in shaky handwriting. "I called you because Mom said if it hurts too much, find someone you trust. I don't need gifts. I just need someone who won't leave me again." The judge read it in silence, her face unreadable, yet her hand lingered on the last line as though it carried more weight than any legal argument. On a bench outside the courtroom during recess, Nora sat beside Sarah, knees pulled to her chest. "Do you think the judge will let me stay with him?" she whispered. Sarah looked down, her warm hazel eyes steady. "I think the judge wants what's best for you, Nora. And from what I've seen, Cole's fighting harder for you than anyone else has in a long time." Nora fiddled with the paper star, hesitant. "Grown-ups say things. Then they leave. But he came. He didn't even know me, and he came." Sarah swallowed past the lump in her throat, silently promising herself she'd never let this child face another empty promise again. Back inside, Grace Lynn testified about Beatrice's deteriorating mental state, recounting how the grandmother no longer recognized Nora most days and could not safely care for her. The child welfare attorney tried to suggest foster care as a temporary measure, but Grace's calm, unwavering tone dismantled the idea. "Nora doesn't need another stranger or another system that forgets her," she said firmly. "She needs someone willing to stand still long enough for her to believe in them. That someone is sitting right there." Sarah was next to speak. Her police uniform contrasted sharply with the courtroom's somber wood. "I've seen kids abandoned, neglected, left to fend for themselves," she said, voice low but cutting through the silence. "Most don't make it out alive." When Mr. Whitman got that call, he didn't ask for proof. He didn't hesitate. He drove through the night and carried her out of hell. If that's not the definition of a father stepping up, I don't know what is. Finally, Judge Hale looked over her glasses at Cole. "This court needs more than heartfelt words, Mr. Whitman. Guardianship is not a momentary vow. It's a promise to stay through storms and sun alike. Do you understand the weight of that?" Cole stepped forward, his voice rough but certain. "Your Honor, all my life I thought success meant building towers that touch the sky. But those towers are empty if a little girl has to sit under a bathroom sink wondering if anyone cares enough to answer the phone. I don't just understand the weight of this promise. I welcome it. It's what I should have carried 12 years ago." For a long, tense moment, the room held its breath. Finally, Judge Hale raised the gavel. Based on DNA confirmation, documented neglect from the previous guardian, and the child's expressed trust in Mr. Whitman, I hereby grant temporary guardianship of Nora Rivers to Cole Whitman for a period of 6 months, subject to regular oversight by Child Protective Services and ongoing trauma therapy for the child. The gavel's sharp strike echoed like a bell, not of finality, but of a fragile beginning. Nora's eyes searched the room until they found Cole's. He crossed the space in 3 long strides, kneeling before her. "Did we win?" she asked, her voice small and certain. He smiled through the tightness in his throat. "We did more than win, sweetheart. We got something no one can take away from us now, a start." She hesitated, then climbed into his arms, wrapping her thin arms around his neck. For the first time, she held on as if she believed he wouldn't disappear. On the way out of the courthouse, Sarah walked beside them, the crisp autumn air filled with falling leaves swirling like promises unspoken. She glanced at Cole. "You know this is only the beginning, right? There will be check-ins, court dates, hurdles." Cole adjusted his grip on Nora, his expression steady. "I've faced harder fights for things that mattered less. This one I'll fight every day." Sarah gave a small, approving nod. In that moment, under the quiet gray sky of Willow Creek, a sense of resolve stitched itself between the 3 of them, not just lawfully binding, but bound by something far stronger, choice, presence, and love, finally given a place to stay. 2 weeks had passed since the courtroom gavel struck, but for Cole and Nora, each day felt like a step into an entirely new world. The leaves of Willow Creek had turned a deep fiery red, carpeting the sidewalks as if the town itself was quietly trying to offer them a softer path to walk on. Cole's new apartment was modest compared to the high-rise he once lived in, but to Nora it felt like a castle. The first night they spent there, she had stood in the doorway of her bedroom, a space just for her painted pale yellow, with a small bookshelf already waiting, and whispered, "Is this really mine?" When Cole nodded, her smile had been uncertain, but radiant, like a candle flickering bravely against years of darkness. Now a Monday morning sun filtered through the curtains, spilling light over a kitchen table set for 2. Nora sat in her chair, a new backpack strapped to her shoulders, even though they hadn't left yet, carefully buttering toast as if it were a delicate ceremony. Cole stood by the counter, pouring orange juice, trying to mask the storm of emotions in his chest. Today was the day. "You nervous?" he asked softly. Nora shrugged, keeping her eyes on her plate. "A little, but it's the good kind." She glanced up, her voice barely above a whisper. "You'll wait right outside." Cole leaned down, brushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear. "Sweetheart, I'll wait as long as you need me to." At Maplewood Elementary, the halls hummed with the sounds of children. Some laughed loudly, others whispered secrets over lunchboxes. For a moment, Nora froze in the doorway of classroom 2B, clutching Cole's hand. The noise, the brightness, it was a universe away from the silence of that bathroom under a sink. Sarah Bell had taken the morning off duty to be there too, standing nearby in her leather jacket, a quiet shield of support. Grace Lynn waved from down the hall, giving Nora an encouraging thumbs up. Cole crouched beside her. "You don't have to prove anything to anyone here," he said softly. "You already made it through the hardest part." Nora's small fingers tightened around his before slowly letting go. She took a breath that seemed to fill every empty space in her chest, then stepped forward. Each movement was tentative but sure, her sneakers squeaking slightly against the linoleum floor as she crossed the threshold of her new life. The teacher, Mrs. Keating, greeted her with a warm smile, leading her to a desk by the window, where sunlight pooled like a gentle promise. Nora sat down, her hands resting on the smooth wood, eyes wide but steady. Through the glass door, Cole watched. For a moment he thought he saw the faint outline of another time, a little girl curled under a sink waiting in darkness. Then the vision dissolved, replaced by this Nora sitting upright, the weight of loneliness beginning to lift. That afternoon, the school held an assembly for Thanksgiving week. Rows of children shuffled into the small auditorium, parents and teachers gathered in the back. Cole sat beside Sarah and Grace, his hands clasped, his breath unsteady. On stage, Nora stood clutching a folded piece of paper. She looked small under the bright lights, but when she spoke, her voice carried quiet yet firm. "The person I'm most grateful for," she began, "isn't someone who was there my whole life. He came later, but he stayed." Her eyes flicked toward Cole, and something unbroken passed between them. "When my stomach hurt, I didn't call an ambulance. I called the person I thought might be my dad. And he came." The room was silent, every adult holding their breath. Nora's voice softened but didn't falter. "I used to think if I was really good and really quiet, someone would show up. Now I know I don't have to be perfect for someone to stay." There was no applause at first, just a stillness thick with the weight of unspoken regrets and newfound hope. Then slowly one pair of hands clapped, then another, until the entire room rose to its feet, not cheering for tragedy, but honoring resilience, the bravery of a child who dared to believe again. Cole wiped his eyes, unashamed of the tears slipping down his face. Beside him, Sarah reached over, squeezing his arm once in quiet solidarity. Grace's own eyes glistened, knowing that moments like this were rare gifts in her line of work. That evening, the three of them, Cole, Nora, and Sarah, sat on the small balcony of their apartment, eating takeout pizza under a sky dusted with stars. Nora leaned against Cole, holding the paper star she had once given him, now taped to his keychain. "Can we help other kids like me someday?" she asked, suddenly, her gaze on the horizon. Sarah exchanged a glance with Cole, a silent understanding passing between them. "I think we can," Cole said softly. "Maybe that's the next promise we make together." Nora gave a tiny nod, as if planting a seed in her heart that might one day grow into something big and bright. Cole wrapped an arm around her, his voice low, almost a vow whispered to the night. "No more empty calls, sweetheart. Not for you, not for anyone else if we can help it." Nora nestled closer, her thin frame no longer curling in fear but unfolding slowly into the warmth of belonging. When the lights were turned off and Nora drifted to sleep in her new bed, clutching a stuffed bear Sarah had given her, Cole stood by the doorway, watching the even rise and fall of her breath. The shadows of regret still lingered behind him, but ahead there was light, a staircase one Nora was finally climbing, each step a little steadier, each step leading to a tomorrow neither of them had dared to dream of before. For the first time in 12 years, Cole understood what it truly meant to be rich. Not the skyscrapers, not the fortune, not the endless meetings. Richness was this, a child's trust, hard-won and fragile, placed in his hands like something sacred. And he vowed as he turned off the light and closed the door softly that he would spend the rest of his life worthy of it. This story reminds us of one simple truth. Sometimes the greatest miracle God gives us is not in wealth, fame, or power, but in the chance to love and be loved. A child's small voice, a single answered call can change a life forever. In our everyday lives, we may pass by people who are hurting, waiting for someone to show up, someone to stay. Let us open our hearts. Let us be the answer to someone's silent prayer. If this story touched you, share it with a friend. Leave a comment and subscribe for more stories of hope and faith. May God bless you and your loved ones with compassion, strength, and warmth every day. And if you believe in miracles and the power of love, type Amen in the comments to spread the blessing.